During the Second World War, the United States military had a problem. Soldiers needed protein. Meat was rationed, supply lines were unreliable, and someone in the research department remembered something that Native Americans had known for 10,000 years. There was a crop growing wild across America that produced 3 times more protein than potatoes, a perennial that never needed replanting, a vine that fixed nitrogen in the soil, making the ground more fertile every year instead of depleting it. A food source so reliable that entire civilizations had been built on it. The military began classified research. They wanted to know if this crop could feed armies when everything else failed. They tested yields, they analyzed nutrition, they studied cultivation methods. The results exceeded expectations. This single crop could produce more protein per acre than any other plant-based food available. It grew in poor soil. It tolerated drought. It required 0 fertilizer because it manufactured its own end. And once planted, it came back year after year, producing more food each season than the season before. The research was documented, the potential was proven, and then the war ended. What happened next should make you furious. The seed companies looked at this crop and saw a business disaster. A perennial that never needs replanting means customers who never come back. A plant that produces its own fertilizer means no chemical sales. A food source that spreads itself means no annual seed purchases. They couldn't ban it, so they buried it. Within 20 years, this crop had vanished from every seed catalog in America. Agricultural schools stopped mentioning it. Extension agents pretended it didn't exist. A food source that had sustained Native American civilizations for millennia was erased from American agriculture in a single generation. Today, 99% of Americans have never heard its name. The name is groundnut, Apios americana. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what they've been hiding. Subscribe now because this information is too important to miss. And share this video with everyone you know who grows food or wants to start. Number 1. What exactly is the groundnut? The groundnut is not a peanut. The name confuses people because peanuts are sometimes called groundnuts in other countries. This is a completely different plant. Apios americana, the American groundnut, a perennial vine native to eastern North America that produces edible tubers on its roots. Picture a vine that climbs anything it can reach: fences, trellises, trees, corn stalks, anything vertical. The vine grows 10 to 20 feet in a single season, covered with beautiful reddish-brown flowers that smell like violets. Butterflies and bees love it. It's ornamental enough to grow in a front yard without anyone knowing it's food. But the magic happens underground. The roots produce tubers strung together like beads on a necklace. Each tuber ranges from marble-sized to egg-sized, connected by thin roots in chains that can stretch several feet. You don't dig up a single potato. You pull up strings of groundnuts, dozens of tubers from a single plant. The taste is unique, nutty, slightly sweet, dense, and satisfying in a way that watery potatoes never achieve. Some people describe it as a cross between potato and roasted chestnut. Others say it reminds them of sweet potato, but firmer. Everyone agrees it has more flavor than any potato variety. Native Americans called it different names in different languages, but they all agreed on one thing. This was a staple crop, not a supplement, not a side dish. The foundation of their food supply for thousands of years before Europeans arrived. The Pilgrims would have starved during their first winters without groundnuts. Native Americans taught them which wild foods were safe, and groundnut was at the top of the list. The crop that Europeans dismissed as primitive literally saved the colonies that would become America. Thomas Jefferson grew groundnuts at Monticello. He recognized their potential and tried to popularize them among American farmers. He wrote letters praising their nutrition and productivity. But the potato had already captured American agriculture, and groundnuts remained a curiosity rather than a staple. Then World War II created a protein crisis. And someone finally paid attention to what Jefferson and the Native Americans had been saying all along. Number 2. The protein advantage. Here's the number that changes everything. Groundnuts contain approximately 17% protein by dry weight. Potatoes contain roughly 2%. Let me say that again because the math matters. Groundnuts have nearly 9 times more protein concentration than potatoes. When you account for differences in yield per acre, groundnuts produce approximately 3 times more total protein than the same acreage of potatoes. This isn't a small improvement. This is a different category of food. Potatoes are carbohydrate crops. They provide calories, which matters for survival. But humans cannot live on carbohydrates alone. We need protein to maintain muscle, repair tissue, support immune function, and survive long-term. During World War II, protein was the limiting factor in military nutrition. Meat was rationed, dairy was scarce. The military needed plant-based protein sources that could be produced domestically without competing for resources needed elsewhere. The groundnut solved this problem completely. 1 acre of groundnuts could provide the protein equivalent of raising livestock on 10 acres. No animal feed required, no barns or fencing, no veterinary care, just a vine that grew itself and produced protein directly. Without the massive inefficiency of converting plant protein to animal protein, the military research documented yields of over 2,000 pounds of tubers per acre on marginal land with minimal inputs. On good soil with proper spacing, yields could reach 4,000 pounds per acre, each pound containing nearly 10 times the protein of a pound of potatoes. The implications were staggering. A small garden of groundnuts could provide more protein than most families could eat. A farm converting from potatoes to groundnuts could feed dramatically more people. A nation adopting groundnuts as a staple could achieve protein security without depending on livestock or imports. But here's what the research also revealed. Groundnuts were perennial. They came back every year. They spread on their own. They needed no annual replanting and no purchased inputs. For military logistics, this was perfect. Plant once, harvest forever, even if supply lines collapsed. For the seed industry, this was catastrophic. No repeat customers, no annual sales, no dependency to exploit. Number 3, the perennial revolution. Every spring, American gardeners perform a ritual of dependency. They buy seeds, they buy transplants, they buy fertilizer and amendments, and all the products the industry tells them they need. Then their crops die at the end of the season, and next spring, they do it all again. This is not how agriculture worked for most of human history. Traditional food systems were built on perennials, plants that came back year after year, trees that produced for decades, vines that outlived the people who planted them. The concept of replanting your entire food supply every single year would have seemed insane to your ancestors. Groundnuts represent what we've lost. You plant groundnuts once, that's it, forever. The vines die back each winter, but the tubers survive underground. Spring arrives and new vines emerge from the surviving roots. Each year, the root system expands. Each year, more tubers form. Each year, your harvest increases without any additional planting. A groundnut patch planted in 1942 could still be producing today if no one had bothered to remove it. 83 years of harvests from a single planting. No seed purchases, no transplanting, no annual dependency on anyone or anything. But the benefits extend beyond convenience. Groundnuts are nitrogen-fixing plants. Like beans and peas, they host bacteria in their roots that capture nitrogen from the air and deposit it into the soil. They don't just avoid depleting your ground, they actively improve it. A bed that grows groundnuts for 5 years will be more fertile at the end than it was at the beginning. The nitrogen fixed by the groundnut roots becomes available to other plants. Grow groundnuts, then grow something else in that spot, and the something else will thrive in the enriched soil. This is the opposite of conventional agriculture, where each harvest removes nutrients and requires more purchased inputs to replace them. Groundnuts break the cycle of depletion. They build soil while producing food. During World War II, this mattered because fertilizer factories had been converted to produce explosives. Nitrogen for bombs meant no nitrogen for farms. Crops that manufactured their own fertility weren't just convenient. They were strategic assets. After the war, the fertilizer industry needed farmers dependent on purchased nitrogen again. Crops that fixed their own nitrogen threatened that entire business model. Groundnuts had to go. Number 4, the growing method. If groundnuts are so superior, why aren't more people growing them? Part of the answer is suppression, but part is also that the knowledge of how to grow them has been lost, along with the crop itself. Let me fix that. Groundnuts need something to climb. They're vines, not bushes. In the wild, they climb trees at the edge of forests. In gardens, they'll climb anything you provide. A fence works perfectly. A trellis works perfectly. Even a dead tree branch stuck in the ground works perfectly. The tubers are planted in spring after last frost, 2 to 4 inches deep, spaced about 6 inches apart. Water them in and wait. The vines emerge in a few weeks and start climbing immediately. First-year harvests are modest. The plant is establishing its root system, and most energy goes into building infrastructure rather than producing food. Some growers don't harvest at all the first year, letting the colony establish fully. Second year changes everything. The established root system explodes with growth. Vines are more vigorous, tuber production multiplies. This is when groundnuts start proving their value. By year 3 and beyond, you're harvesting from a mature system, dozens of tubers per plant, chains of food pulled from the ground like strings of edible pearls. More harvest than most families can eat, from a surprisingly small space. Harvest happens in fall after frost has killed the vines, or in early spring before new growth emerges. The tubers store well in cool conditions, similar to potatoes. They can also be left in the ground and harvested as needed, the soil itself serving as the root cellar. Cooking is straightforward. Boil them, roast them, fry them, add them to soups and stews. The texture is denser than potato, so they hold their shape better in cooking. The flavor is richer, so they need less seasoning. One warning that the old literature mentions: groundnuts contain compounds that some people find hard to digest in large quantities when first trying them. Start with small portions. Let your gut adapt. Most people have no problems after a few meals. Number 5. Why the Native Americans chose it. 10,000 years of agriculture is a long time. That's how long Native American civilizations cultivated and depended on groundnuts before Europeans arrived. 10,000 years of selective pressure, choosing the best plants, spreading them to new areas, building food systems around them. This wasn't random foraging. This was sophisticated agriculture. The groundnut was deliberately cultivated in what historians call forest gardens, managed ecosystems where useful plants were encouraged and competitors were removed. Native Americans would transplant groundnuts to new areas, tend them minimally, and harvest them annually. The crop fit their lifestyle perfectly. It required no annual planting, which mattered for semi-nomadic peoples. It improved soil fertility, which mattered for sustainable land management. It produced protein, which mattered for nutrition, and it stored well, which mattered for winter survival. European colonizers noted the prevalence of groundnuts in Native American food systems. Early accounts describe villages surrounded by groundnut patches. Trading posts bought and sold groundnuts as a commodity. The crop was ubiquitous wherever indigenous peoples farmed. Then the colonizers decided potatoes were civilized and groundnuts were primitive. The distinction had nothing to do with nutrition or productivity. Potatoes came from European-influenced South American agriculture. Groundnuts came from the people Europeans were displacing. Cultural prejudice determined which crops survived in American agriculture. What the colonizers didn't understand was that Native Americans had spent 10,000 years optimizing their food system. The groundnut wasn't primitive. It was the product of more agricultural development than anything Europe had produced. A perennial protein source that fixed nitrogen and improved over time was superior to an annual carbohydrate crop that depleted soil and required constant inputs. But acknowledging that would have meant acknowledging that indigenous agriculture was more advanced than European agriculture. That was unacceptable. So the groundnut was dismissed as wild food, savage food, food for people who didn't know any better. And the potato, requiring annual purchase and constant fertilization, became the American staple. Not because it was better, because it fit the narrative and the emerging seed industry. Number 6. The suppression after World War II. The military research during World War II proved everything Native Americans had known for millennia. Groundnuts were nutritionally superior. They were productively competitive. They were agriculturally sustainable. The research existed. The documentation was thorough. The potential was undeniable. So where did it go? After the war ended, the agricultural industry returned to business as usual. And business as usual meant selling inputs, seeds, fertilizers, equipment. The entire economic model of American agriculture depended on farmers buying products every year. Groundnuts threatened that model completely. A perennial crop eliminates seed sales after the first year. A nitrogen-fixing crop eliminates fertilizer sales entirely. A crop that improves over time eliminates the replacement cycle that drives agricultural commerce. The seed companies didn't need to ban groundnuts. They simply stopped carrying them. Catalogs that had offered hundreds of varieties of annual vegetables somehow had no room for perennial alternatives. Extension agents, trained by industry-funded programs, somehow never mentioned nitrogen-fixing food crops. Within 20 years, groundnuts had disappeared from commercial agriculture. The crop that had sustained civilizations became a botanical curiosity, mentioned in ethnobotany books but absent from garden centers. Today, finding groundnut tubers to plant requires searching specialty nurseries and native plant suppliers. The major seed companies don't carry them. The hardware store garden centers have never heard of them. A crop that should be in every American garden exists only in the margins. This wasn't natural market selection. People didn't try groundnuts and prefer potatoes. They were never given the choice. The choice was made for them by industries that profited from their dependency. Number 7. How to get started. The suppression wasn't complete. Groundnuts still exist. They still grow wild across eastern North America. They still produce tubers exactly as they did 10,000 years ago. Here's how you can join the people who remember. First, obtain tubers. Specialty native plant nurseries carry them. Online suppliers sell them. Foragers find them wild along streams and forest edges throughout their native range. A few tubers is all you need to start a permanent food supply. Second, prepare a climbing structure. A simple fence works. A trellis works. A section of wire fencing attached to posts works. The vines will climb anything, so don't overthink it. Third, plant in spring after last frost. 2 to 4 inches deep, 6 inches apart. Water well, wait. Fourth, be patient. First year is establishment. Second year shows improvement. Third year and beyond demonstrates why Native Americans base civilizations on this crop. Fifth, harvest in late fall or early spring. Follow the vines down to the roots. Pull gently and the chains of tubers emerge. Take what you need, leave some to continue growing, and the patch perpetuates itself. That's it. 5 steps to a permanent protein supply that improves every year without additional inputs. The seed industry hopes you never learn this. They hope you keep buying annual crops that die and need replacing. They hope you stay dependent on their products forever. Prove them wrong. The crop that feeds you forever is the crop they can never sell you twice. That's why you've never heard of groundnuts. That's why your grandparents never grew them. That's why agricultural schools don't teach them and extension agents don't mention them. For 10,000 years, Native Americans built food systems on this crop. They chose it over everything else available because it was superior. Perennial production, protein density, nitrogen fixation, increasing yields over time. Then European colonizers decided it was primitive because indigenous people grew it. The seed industry decided it was unprofitable because customers didn't come back. And American agriculture decided you should grow potatoes instead, annual crops that need replanting and fertilizing and purchasing every single year forever. The groundnut didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked too well for the wrong people's profits. But here's what they never counted on. The groundnut is still out there, still growing wild across America, still producing protein for anyone who knows where to look, still available for anyone willing to grow what their ancestors grew. The military proved its value during World War II. Native Americans proved its value over 10 millennia. The only people who deny its value are the people who profit when you buy something else. You have a choice now. Keep growing annual crops that die and leave you starting over every spring. Or plant something once that feeds you forever. Keep depending on seed companies and fertilizer manufacturers and the whole system designed to extract money from your desire to eat. Or break free with a crop that asks nothing after the first planting. Keep forgetting what your ancestors knew. Or start remembering. The groundnut is waiting. It's been waiting since before Europeans arrived. It's been waiting through centuries of suppression. It's been waiting for people like you to discover what the seed industry has been hiding. Subscribe if you want more forgotten foods that threaten the wrong industries. Share this with everyone who grows food or wants to start. And plant groundnuts this spring before they figure out how to make you forget again. Because the best time to establish a perennial food supply is before you need it. And you will need it. Everyone eventually needs it. I'll see you in the next video.